money is something that we all need and we can't take it for granted. We need to be able to protect our money, manage our money, and grow our money. And so the last part of the core functions of the Portfolio Career Guide, I'm going to be talking about cash and what that really means, especially if you're an independent professional or somebody who is a contractor, independent consultant, etc., etc. So the first thing I want to talk about is when you're thinking about money, you need to be very clear about understanding what is your goal right now, okay? Because if you don't have a goal in mind, then actually money management is just for money management's sake. And so thinking about that, I've broken this down into two different things. I'm just looking at my notes. So the first thing is, what lifestyle goal do you have? So how do you want to live your life? And so the way to do this is to think about who do you want to become or who do you want to be? So when I say that, think of actual avatars or characters that you could become. Maybe it is a doctor, a YouTuber, an astronaut, a whatever it may be. Describe in detail like what that person does, etc., etc., why they're doing it. And so if you have difficulty with this, I have a life navigation system that helps you talk about this stuff or go through this stuff in enough detail. Of course, you can go back and forth with something like Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini. However, yes, it can produce you the framework, but is it authentic to you and is it humanized? Not necessarily. So the offer's there. But the point being made is you really want to think about who you want to become. Moving on from becoming, you want to understand, okay, what is that person doing from day to day with friends, family, community, connections, etc., etc., and what do they have in their lives? And so you can actually calculate this. You can think about all of the expenses that contribute to a person like that, in addition to the amount of money that they're making. And actually net, what does that look like each month? And what does that look like over the year? Gives you a bit of a plan, so to speak. So that's lifestyle there. I'm not going to go into that into too much detail, but there is a lot of stuff that you can do there. Don't rely on AI to just do this for you. I think that'll be dumb. You need to think. Don't create gaps in your brain because you're trying to leverage AI with everything that you do. The second thing that you need to do is think about what are the short-term, mid-term, and long-term goals that you have. So maybe your short-term goal is to go on holiday, or maybe it's to essentially go to some sort of event, etc., etc. These are short-term things. Mid-term, maybe buying a car, or maybe getting a house deposit, etc., etc. Longer term, maybe an investment thing, or maybe it's a wedding thing, or whatever it is. The point being made is categorize and define what specific money goals that you have, because that will help you understand what you need to do moving forward. And so once we've done that, we want to observe our activities. What do I mean by this? Understand what you do week to week. Maybe do it over a span of 2 to 4 weeks. If you use your calendar for everything, great. You can track this stuff already. You've been tracking it. If you don't use your calendar, then essentially what you want to do is get to a stage where you're starting to log down what you do. And so the way I've done it before in the past is I would use my AI voice notes app to capture everything, and then I would assess everything at the end. Maybe you just write it down, maybe you put it on post-it notes. It doesn't really matter. Just observe your activities. And you also, in liaison to that, you want to analyze your expenses. And that's a bit easier because all you need to do is export, the Excel spreadsheet, the CSV file from your bank account, and then you could do some magic stuff. If you're connected to something like, I've forgotten what it's called, but it's money something. If you're connected to one of these money analytics tools, then automatically it does this for you. And if you've got things categorized already, even better, because it means you can break down the analysis of how you spend your money. Why do I say this stuff? Well, really and truly, when I have done this before in the past, I have clearly seen patterns. September and October are the most expensive months in many ways because there is some unknown bill, and literally it's unknown. It's always different. Something that just pops up. Maybe it comes down to a car. Maybe it comes down to a charge. Something happens around those months. Now, there is also seasonal stuff. So for example, December to January is naturally difficult because we have the festive celebration, and then we have a shorter month because, again, you get paid less because there's usually 2 weeks off, whatever it may be. Then there are situations around major events. So this could be weddings, this could be funerals, this could be birthdays that are lined up. Think to yourself, are there a string of birthdays that just seem to happen from end to end? A lot of my friends and family, especially friends as well, have birthdays between October to March. So for 6 months, it's a bit mad, especially if you're going out. And it is a choice, but these are the choices we make based on our circle community and the people we have in our lives as well. So this gives you a good idea of helping you analyze your expenses and knowing the trends and all that kind of stuff there. Now, what you need to do is calculate what you need to have in order for you to reach your either short-term, mid-term, or long-term goals, or your lifestyle goals. And so I obviously said this earlier, but calculate the figure. And we don't necessarily need to be super sky high at the beginning. Maybe we're just focusing on the short term and the midterm first, potentially. If you have debt, consider that and take that into considerations. These are all things to think about so that you can calculate this stuff. Now, you want to have some sort of like, I guess, understanding of what you need to do in order for you to achieve those goals. So when you look at all of your expenses, okay, you'll first do it for the month, the last month, then you may do it for the last quarter. But in fact, if you've never looked at it before, it's been a very long time, look at the last 12 months. That's what you want to look at, because there may be things you pay for annually. There may be consistencies when it comes to month or quarter to quarter or whatever it may be. You have to understand the patterns, because once you understand what your expenses are and what you're aiming to do and what money comes in, then you want to determine what actions you need to take. Do you need to reduce your expenses? Do you need to cancel subscriptions? Do you have to aggressively pay off your debts if you've got any debts? So is it the avalanche method? Is it the snowball method? Okay, so the snowball one is where you sort of like gradually focus on something smaller and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, or you do the opposite with the avalanche method. Again, speak to a financial advisor or research this yourself to understand it fully. Do you tackle something that has the highest interest first or the smallest interest? You'll understand the nuance of what makes sense for yourself relative to anything else. I know there are some people out there who are like, okay, focus on the thing that has an interest rate higher than, let's say, for example, your mortgage or your investments or whatever it may be. Fair enough. Different ways to think about it. But you have to do what makes sense for yourself. And of course, if you can't afford a financial advisor, or if you can't speak to one for free, or if you can't speak to someone who's got sensibility around it, go back and forth with your chatbot, look at things online, watch things and videos to get an idea of how to be a good manager, so to speak. And so we've spoken about all of this stuff there. You have to think to yourself, do you want to go down the budgeting route? Now, I don't do this per se now, but I did do this before because it was something that I wanted to do to help me understand how to better manage my money. And so you may give yourself an allowance. Okay, you may have another bank account. Maybe you have two current accounts, one Monzo account and one, let's say, for example, Barclays account. Barclays may be your main one, Monzo is your fuddy-duddy money one. And so maybe every single week you transfer £100 into the Monzo account that you use for spending. And actually the Barclays one is purely for auto expenses, subscriptions, monthly payments, direct debits, standing orders, etc., etc. So that's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is, I guess, is essentially making sure you do some sort of conscious spending. So you're not just spending by heart, so to speak. And so you have to think about what groove makes sense for you. Now, when it comes to savings, the question becomes, do you pay off your debts first or do you save? Some people like to do both because they like the feeling of making sure that they're clearing their debts. Other people are like, no, I need to clear off my debts first before I save anything. Some people decide, okay, they save X amount first, like £1,000 or £2,000. And then they tackle the debt before they actually start on the savings. You have to understand what makes sense for you. What I personally tried to do before, I tried to do the whole, saving and debts thing at the same time. It didn't work. So I focused on aggression. I decided to be as aggressive as possible with paying off my debts. I think the original payment was like £550 a month, and then I started to add an additional £1,000 every single month, and that cleared it much, much quicker. I saved like 3 years or so, or 4 years, or whatever it was. So you have to decide what makes sense for your lifestyle. Minimum payment's not going to cut it. Okay, I can understand in some instances where you're doing minimum payment, you're in overdraft. Trust me, been there, done that. I know exactly how that feels. And of course, if you feel that's the only option you have, then do that. But then if there is a way to get out, even if you feel like you're making all the money in the world for your current account to make you look healthy, then take the way out and pay it off aggressively. And so once you've done that, then you can start thinking about savings. And so you want to make sure that you have a high savings account. How do you know if it's high? Well, the best way to know if it's high is to look at the bank of interest percentage, so to speak. And so if the number is as close to that as possible and you shop around, then you know you're in a good space. So if you see the bank of interest rate is 5%, and then you get savings accounts that are 4.75% because they're usually 0.25 to 0.5% out, and that's not a standard thing. That's something I've observed, at least anyway. Then you know you got a high savings account. But of course, you can check between different sort of savings accounts. You want to look for ISAs, okay? And typically you can get them from high street banks. There are specific sort of organizations that do this as well, that typically financial institutions in some way, shape or form. They need to have the right sort of like FCA regulations and protections, etc., etc. And there are also things like Trading 212 that offer these types of things as well. But shop around and do your homework and speak to a professional if you need to. But make sure you save and you stick to a number that is affordable. So this is why you need to understand your expenses. This is why you need to do a bit of a projection and understand, okay, this is what comes in, this is what goes out, this is what is left, this is what I can apportion to debt. Once that's done, this is what I can apportion to savings. And this is my goal. It's going to take me X months. It's calculated, it's specific, it's to the point. That's what you need to do. And so once you understand this, then you're in a position of strength because you know exactly what is going into savings each and every month. The next thing to talk about is the growing element side of things. Okay, so this is really centered around investing. And so in my list here that I typed out, there's cash and paper investing, or should I say more to do with things like trading, investing into the stock market, or into a fund of some sorts, an index fund as an example, or an exchange traded fund, so an ETF. So you need to think what makes sense for you. And if you are doing the whole investing into something, using something like Trading 212, and I've got a special link below that only lasts for the next 20 days or so, so you can check that out for yourself, then I guess in this instance, the portfolio that makes sense for you is based on your age. So if you are like 35 and below, or should we say, if you are 28 and below, should we say, you can be a bit more risky if you want to. That may look like a bit more crypto. That may look like more stocks. That may look like some of that kind of stuff there. This is not advice by any way, shapes or form. I'm just using this as an example. The reason why those things are cited as riskier is because, again, there are no other assets collated together that spreads your risk. And so when we look at a stock that is tech heavy, AI heavy, blockchain, this, that, the latest thing, yeah, it may grow quickly, but it may go down quickly as well. So you have to understand what type of risk or what type of appetite you have as well. In addition to that, if you were like 28 to like, let's say 30 odd, like 38, then you can be a little bit risky, but not too risky. And again, this is just general advice I've seen and I've applied myself. And so you may have a little bit of crypto, but you may be looking at other things like gold or S&P 500, which I think everyone should invest in anyway, or looking at sort of like emerging markets, etc., etc. And of course, 38 to 48, it gets less riskier, and it gets less risky. And as you get older, you may start looking at things like bonds that are a bit more, well, seen as safe, but given the current bond market at the moment and how things are going, I don't know if that's going to necessarily always be true, but it has been true for the last couple of decades. And so these are things that you need to investigate for yourself. Understand markets, understand economics, understand trends. It doesn't have to be crazy detail, but enough for you to understand in terms of you investing your money. but always invest what you're willing to lose. And so if you don't know what to invest, an index fund such as an S&P 500 is always a great start anyway. And so that's everything in terms of like investing in terms of money. You got property investing. I'm not a property investor. I have dabbled within that space before. But again, get a mentor. That's what I'm going to say to you. Just get a mentor, learn about it, maybe double up with someone, see if there's opportunities with, again, sort of investing, utilizing parents' property as an example and getting equity from that, or if it's passed on to you, maybe you put that into a trust if you can afford that, etc., etc. So I would just say get expert help when it comes to that, but that's another vehicle. There's obviously investing in your business if you want to start up a business, and I've spoken about some of this stuff already, but of course there are multiple different types of businesses that you can start, product-based ones or service-based ones. I'm not going to go too deep into that now, but it's something to consider. And of course, invest in yourself, invest in education, invest in qualifications, invest in ad hoc learning, whatever it may be. Don't forget to invest in this, because once you understand more, then there's much more that you have the potential to apply as well. So that's the grow element. Then when it comes to the protect your money element, there's a whole list of things. So I'm going to read through my list here. So we got life insurance. So this covers for like serious illness or death. And of course, you know, there are different types of life insurance, etc., etc. So, you know, there are some types of life insurance that are relative to the type of mortgage that you have. So you have one that is a level term one or a decreasing one, depending on, again, where you're at with your mortgage. We got critical illness. So this is, again, just in case there is something crazy that happens with somebody. Maybe, again, I don't want to mention any medical conditions because I don't want to get anything wrong. But of course, this helps you with lump sum payments for specific types of conditions. You want to make sure you're not really lying about anything when you fill out your forms and you're very clear about your health. Of course, the more unhealthy you are, the older you are, the higher the premium, so to speak. There's also income protection. Okay, so things for like accident and sickness. And I know that depending on what type of contract you have, the type of employment you have, you may have this type of well, I wouldn't say this type of cover. You wouldn't have this type of cover. That's something else. But let me come back to that point. But with income protection, it's more so to do with accidental cover and sickness as well, just in case, which causes you not to work anymore. Then you've got things like content insurance. So content insurance covers I guess if anything happens within your property, the contents of it. So like digital devices, other types of appliances, etc., etc. So you can be specific about the appliances that you cover. You can have a more broader general cover, but of course that becomes more expensive. These are all things to think about. Going back to the income protection very quickly, there's not much adequate or effective income protection cover for freelancers and contractors, etc., etc. So if you do find some, do let me know. But if you don't, it's understandable. There's not much out there. And so there are ways in which you can manage it. But of course, things like savings, all that kind of stuff there comes into play, because this is where you start talking about having, 6 months worth of savings, 3 months worth of savings, etc., etc. So coming back to the insurances, you've got building insurance. If you are a leaseholder, then the freeholder may have the building insurance on your behalf. If you are a freeholder yourself, you're most likely going to have the building insurance. So this covers for any sort of like life event, big events that happen to the property, etc., such as flooding, I think it's like lightning stuff and just things that you don't expect to happen, so to speak. But check out the clauses in terms of what they do cover and what they don't cover. There's boiler cover as well. That's come into good use for me recently. And so make sure your boiler's checked every single year and get the repairs done. There's also business insurance. So there's public liability, professional indemnity, and employees liability as well. So if you're speaking in public, or if you're doing something that, again, your end client doesn't necessarily appreciate, or if your employees do any of this stuff, then you've got that cover. Then you've also got IR35 status cover as well. So this is more for the contractors and the consultants and all those different types of people as well. If you have kids and you are married, then there is something known as a will. So you can think about how do you write that will, get a professional to support you with that. In addition to that, there's also your self-invested private pension. So there are pensions that you can invest into if you are inside of IR35 and you're with an agency, so to speak, or you are employed. Okay, so obviously that will cover state pension, and if you're let's say for example you're independent by nature, then a SIP may be more preferred, or some sort of, I think it's a LISA, that you can invest in a LISA in order for you to save for your pension down the line. And so it's a lifetime ISA, and so that can also be used for property sort of like deposits as well if you're going down that route. So that's everything under the sun that I can personally think of, but I'm sure there are some other nuanced things as well that a more professional person can talk to. But again, these are things to think about. You want to make sure that finally that you have private healthcare cover in some way, shape, or form, because you never know what could happen. And waiting on the NHS, as great as they are in a lot of the things that they do, they may actually slow you down. This is how I see it. When it comes to general things, then I will go to the GP. I may go to A&E, or I may book an appointment with whatever. But if there is niche sort of like experiences that you have, like a foot problem, a back problem, whatever it may be, go to a specialist. I'm telling you, you are just investing in the right thing, and it just saves so much time. So yeah, think about private healthcare, GP out of hour services, all of this kind of stuff that supports. Halifax is great for that. If you got any issues and you're an ultimate reward customer, then you can actually utilize their online digital GP services to get the support. It's definitely helped me before in the past. So these are things to think about. I want to try and wrap this up because it's getting longer than 20 minutes now. The final bit is about consistency. So you want to make sure that you are compounding efforts. It's about doing the same thing again and again and again and again and again and not stopping. Okay, this really comes down to savings. This comes down to how you make money. This comes down to contributing towards insurances. You want to ensure that there's the right level of delayed gratification. So I always think about rice in a microwave. Rather than taking it out, yeah, 10 seconds in where you have soggy rice, make sure you stick to that minute. It's usually longer than a minute, of course, but I'm using this as an analogy and an example because if you delay your gratification, if you slow things down, if you can see the bigger picture, this is why we have that goal at the beginning, and you have reminders of your goals, then you're more likely going to succeed, because everything in life is based on consistency when it comes to our success. Really think about that. And the sort of the final bit of this consistency element is reviewing every month and or quarter. Okay, so looking at what comes in, what comes out, what needs to change and adjust. This is looking at your profit and loss statement essentially. Okay, so just like a company may look at their income, okay, and they may look at their forecast and reforecast and their performance against the previous year, this is what you're doing as well, and you're also doing this for your expenses. So be very clear about what your profit and loss statement looks like, because that'll help you engineer what you want moving forward in the future. Final thing to say is you want to make sure that you communicate with your partner. If it's your partner you're communicating with, or if you're living at home, you speak up to your parents as well. I know for many sort of like cultures, especially within the black community, there is something known as black tax, where you're paying anywhere between £300 to £600 every single month to I say the bank of mom and dad, but yeah, to mom and dad. And so that is something that needs to be taken into consideration. You can go down the route of having a conversation with them if you're bold enough to do it, or you could just not do it, take the consequences, or start thinking, actually, I need to move out if you have that opportunity. Or you can reduce the black tax. There are different options, but you have to tackle it in some way, shape, or form, because you need to think about yourself. It's so difficult, but it's a thing that exists. Speak to parents, speak to your partners, and actually with your partner, do it together. Sit down with them every week or every single month. Have the conversation, okay? Get them to do it, and you should do it as well. You may be the sort of couple that has a joint account where all the expenses go into, and you have a portion of your money go into that where you still have your own accounts. You may have this thing where all your money goes into one account together and there's no money into your account apart from the allowance that you get. It may be split proportionally based on who makes most money and who doesn't. There is no right way. There is only a way that makes sense for you guys, and you need to discuss that and trust each other to do that. Have your own type of savings, but also have collective and joint savings as well when it comes to emergencies, etc., etc. So hopefully this is helpful. Try to be as comprehensive as possible. And so if you've got any questions centered around this stuff in terms of how I may approach it, then I can let you know. But I'm not a financial advisor by any way, shape, or form. But this concludes the first part of the portfolio career guide. So the whole part centered around the core and foundations of any sort of portfolio career. So we went through context, we then went through contract, and we've just finished cash. So the next stage, we're going to be focusing on grow. Anyway, if you want to see more videos centered around portfolio careers, contracting, independent consulting, and the alike, don't forget to subscribe to this channel, like this video, and hit the notification bell. And as always, my friends, understand, reach, and expand. Peace.